Hey guys, welcome to Baseball and Coffee. This is Tino and Aaron, and today we are going to review or go over our second base rankings for 2022. How you doing, Aaron?
I'm doing well. And Dynasty. Don't forget,
Yes.
we're not just looking at 2022.
Yes, 2022 redraft and Dynasty. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Any fun coffee experiences this week?
I was reflecting about that before we started. I don't have any specific coffee memories. I was in Indiana over the last couple of days for a family commitment, and that's where I grew up with Starbucks. And so in a couple of stores who, go in there, it's kind of down memory lane, and just thinking about people I've worked with and walking through some of the stores, doing peer walks and experiences I've had, coffee shops where Laura and I went to. So
Nice.
I don't have any specific coffee memories or coffee brewing things this week or anything, but yeah, I just, as we've talked a little bit about on the podcast, coffee's not just coffee in our lives, it's kind of connection. So some interesting memories and things the last couple of days.
Awesome. I don't have a whole lot to report other than still trying to figure out a bag of Walla Walla roastery coffee that I bought from the store that seems to be way over roasted for being labeled full city, and I'm not sure what to do with it. That, and then my other thought is that whenever I'm anywhere that has a Dunkin' Donuts, I have to get an iced regular coffee with a ton of sugar and cream because it's one of my favorite treats in the world. So had I been in Indiana, I certainly would have had an iced regular from Dunkin' Donuts. Let's see. Did you happen to see, we're going to go over one trade that was made in our league last week. And it was between Matt, who was our guest last week, and myself. I traded to Matt Jared Kelnick and a round 14 pick in our upcoming draft. We keep 15, so round 14 is the equivalent to a 29. So Kelnick and a 29 for Miguel Vargas of the Dodgers, Nick Gonzalez of the Pirates, and a fifth round pick in our draft, which is the equivalent of a round 20. Just for a little background, I am a Mariners fan, and trading Kelnick was something that I would not have thought of doing previously, but I've found that my love for Julio Rodriguez is greater than my love for Kelnick, and I feel a little uncomfortable relying too much upon a bunch of players from one team. And I also just did some thinking on Kelnick, and some of his metrics were not as kind last year as I thought they might have been. And so I decided to pull the trigger on the trade, and I may come to regret it, but that's okay. I'm happy with it. And then on my side, we can talk about it later, but getting Vargas and Gonzalez was a big deal for me. What was your initial reaction to the trade when you saw it?
It took me a couple of days, honestly, to get over the emotional aspect of you trading a Mariner.
Nice.
I just couldn't get over the shock of that.
Right.
Once I did turn the page and accept, okay, it did happen. I was also surprised that the Matt had traded for Kelenic. I think from your side, I understand why the prospects you got in return, as well as a decent pickup grade this year. But I think for me, it's more about those players than it is that pick.
Right.
Getting Vargas, who we talked about last week, as well as Nick Gonzalez, who I'm really fond of as well. So 2 infield prospects for Kelenic. I liked that return. But I was surprised that Matt was willing to give it up for Kelenic, who he hasn't spoken real positively about, but maybe he was just, I won't say gamesmanship, but maybe he was just trying to rib you and kind of just masking how he really felt about Kelenic's outlook. Yeah, I agree. I think for your, if you didn't have Rodriguez and Kyle Lewis already, I think I might question a little bit about trading Kelenic at this point. But I think it's smart and from a team construction standpoint to mitigate some of those that risk, and spread that out across different teams. I think it makes a lot of sense. And I think if you are going to move a player, I would say at his low point, but certainly lower than we thought of him this time last year, getting two prospects who have such great hit tools to carry their profile as they move up into the higher levels this year, I think are great two chips to put on the table. So,
Right.
So
the just quickly, the part of it for me is that we start 3 outfielders in a utility, and I have Acuna and Buxton, and so Kelnick would be my third, and then one of those, either Kelnick or J-Rod, once he comes up, would have been in my utility spot. And I do like to try to keep the utility spot free. If I'm going to park someone there, it would be an outfielder, because I don't want the errors. But I like to have the freedom to play other players, or to construct my roster in a way where I'm not reliant upon utility every day for the same person. And the other thing was so when I looked at the Kelnick on Baseball Savant, I was pretty surprised by some of the things that I found. His average exit velocity last year was in the 20th percentile. His max was 77, but his hard hit was also low at 37. And the one that really surprised me was his sprint speed was 54. And so, if he is going, and not that you want to put too much worth into his sprint speed, but if we're thinking of him as a potential 20-20 guy, or say a 25-20 guy, or even a 30-20 guy, I don't know that he's getting to 20 steals. And I had that feeling about him prior to looking at at Baseball Savant, but it was telling to me when I see a low average exit velocity, and I see a low hard hit, and I see an average sprint speed, that makes me a little bit nervous. And so to be able to turn that player into, a potentially slugging third or first baseman for the Dodgers, and Nick Gonzalez, who is my favorite second base prospect, I was really happy to do that. But the trade essentially for me, because I would have to let go of my 15th keeper, was Kelnick plus either Christian Hernandez or Luis Patino for Vargas and Gonzalez. So it's important that I look at it that way as well.
That's right, because it's a 2-for-1.
Mm-hmm.
And I think looking at it from that side, I mean, he's going really young, but I think he's also looking for opportunities to get players who are still young, but also closer or in the majors who can play, so he can be a little bit more competitive. So trading 2 of the prospects he's gathered for someone who is going to be in the big leagues this year also makes sense for him.
Also, I think there's an element of, Matt wanting a Mariner as someone who lives in Seattle. And I know that was certainly a motive for him in picking up Kelnick. So yeah, interesting trade. I think it's an interesting conversation to have around kind of roster construction and process. And I was, in hindsight, I don't often have trades where, days later I feel even more enthusiastic about it, but this was certainly one of them. I don't necessarily feel like I came out way ahead in this trade, but I'm more excited about the trade for my team.
Yeah, I can understand that completely.
Right, let's move to our second base top 16 redraft. This should be interesting.
Yeah.
Who do you have?
So
go ahead.
Yeah, my first, let's go tiers.
Sure.
My first tier, I have Albies and Simeon. Let me just say, it pains me to have 2 guys in my first 2 who have an xOBP under 320. Just for my biases, that's a tough thing to swallow. Sure. But they're clearly the top 2 options.
So before you get into those 2, let me ask you, is there a reason why you rated Trey Turner as a shortstop instead of a second baseman?
Yeah, for sure. I see him as a shortstop. He's going to play shortstop this year, and he's going to drop off. He'll lose this eligibility that he has this year. Certainly he would be in that top tier in the number 1 spot if you're going to consider him a second baseman. I also, to me, if I rostered him, I would be playing him at short.
Okay.
because I think the second base pool is a little bit deeper.
Mhm.
There's more of a fall off at shortstop. The top end talent is incredible,
Sure.
but when I look at the pool, I feel like there's more of a drop off at short.
Mhm.
So I would play him at short, and I would go into the second base pool. So I don't think of him as a second baseman. I don't think he's going to be a second baseman this next year. And since we're looking at not just 2022 but also dynasty, I just the way I look at the position, I don't see him as a second baseman. But
Got it. If so for me, if we're talking redraft, I did put him as a second baseman. I think primary primarily because I tend to, and this is probably just a personal thing that I would tend to, I think I like the shortstop group better, even though it's not as deep. And so I would, if I had Trey Turner, I would probably play him there. In Dynasty, though, he's not a second baseman for me. If it was a Dynasty league, I certainly would rate him as a shortstop. So go ahead with Semien and Albies. I do have Semien and Albies as well.
okay. Yeah, I mean, again, I'm not a fan of the lack of on base skills, but you know, they were both 120 WRC plus, both over 800 OPS. I know, and both of them are expected to post over 30 home runs. Even with Simeon going to a worse ballpark, which I think there's quite a bit of stir about that. But his K rate is only 20%, and he is an Iron Man. He plays every single day, so I would feel very confident by him staying there. And again, Albies isn't my type of player, but his projections for 30 and 19, 19 being the steals. That's just great production. And it's interesting looking at his hard hit rate. Doesn't really neither he or Simeon are up there with the heavier upper tier. They're in the low 40s, high 30s, but their barrel rates are very good for the position. So they do barrel the ball, which explains why they're able to produce that power. So to me, the underlying skill supports that they're going to continue to be able to do that, and that really sets them apart.
I think Albies is actually 799 OPS last year, which was obviously it's nitpicking, but I was surprised by you see his counting stats, and that's what we're using obviously. Last year 103 runs, 30 home runs, 106 RBIs, 20 steals, but 259 and 310 is not pretty, and a 7% walk rate isn't either. Albies is my number 3. I know that that's not a popular pick amongst prognosticators, but and I do understand that he's 25, but there's something for me makes me hesitate about his are we going to count on his bat to ball skill and his power every single year to produce consistently this way if he's not going to be a very disciplined hitter? There's a 39% chase rate, which is nuts. And he plus a 7% walk rate, and it's just, it gives me a little pause. I know the counting stats have been there for the last 3 years in a row, and that's a pretty long history to be putting up numbers like he has, but there's something about it that's just slightly fishy to me. I might be proven wrong, but that's just me. And then Simeon is my number 2, and there are a million arguments to rate Simeon below Albies. Not the least of which is he played a bunch of his games in Dunedin, Florida, and in Buffalo, New York, which ended up being the 2 top offense producing parks in the major leagues last year, as they didn't play in Toronto as their home field for most of the year. So he put up 45 home runs, but he did it in these incredibly hitter-friendly parks. He was in a lineup in Toronto with, the likes of Guerrero and Bichette, and he's certainly not going to have that in Texas. And so the opportunity to score and drive in runs is going to be much less. And then I heard a stat. I wish I remembered the podcast I was listening to yesterday, but it made me really think twice about Simeon, because he said that Simeon had 50 barrels last year, and he hit 45 home runs. And so only 5 of his barrels were not home runs. And then when you look at his spray chart and his home run chart on Baseball Savant, they're all to like down the left field line. And so, it's a very kind of specific way to hit home runs. And so again, he's put up numbers as well, but there's some things about his profile that give me a little bit of pause. But what I'd like to say in comparing Simeon and Albies is You got Simeon with the 9% K or walk rate and Albies with the 7%. Their K rates are the same. Their barrel rates are the same. Their hard hit is similar. Max exit is similar. Average exit velocity is similar. But then Simeon's zone contact is 89 and Albies is 82. And then Simeon's chase rate is 26% and Albies is 39. And so if I'm choosing between those two players, certainly there's 6 years or 5 years age difference, and that is a part of the equation. But I see Simeon as just kind of a better profile and a better hitter. And I don't think the 15 home runs difference and the 12 runs difference and that 0.074 difference in OPS is a mirage. I still believe that Marcus Simeon is a better player. You have anything to add with those two?
I don't. And like what you said about pull power, I mean, right-handed power is the thing that the Texas ballpark suppresses the most, but he played in Oakland before.
Right.
And that place is cavernous as well. And he was able to post good power numbers. I think a lot of that is too just him knowing, where he can get the ball out. So yeah, I'm not against Albies having him below him. Yeah, it's just I look at Albies again. He's not my kind of player in terms of what I like to go after, but the production's been there, and he's 25. So sometimes I have to guard against like my own bias to players I don't particularly care for. Maybe I overcorrect for that and put them higher than my data, what the data tells me I should, because I feel like, oh, you're just pushing him down.
Right. Does Albies feel safe to you in that tier when you have to pick him in a redraft? You're picking him as like mid to late second round.
No, I don't think so. I would wait.
Yeah, I think there are other directions that I would go. I think if he was, if he's at the very end of a 16-team draft or at the very end of the second round, say I pick, 29, 30, 31, 32, I would consider him there. But with the depth, some of the depth of power numbers at second base, I think I would wait. I also just don't trust that he's going to put the numbers up because of the profile. So who's in your next tier?
I don't either. Tier 2 for me is Marte, India, and Altuve.
This is when we differ. Awesome. So my tier 2 is Altuve, low, and I'm assuming elbow health with Max Muncy.
Okay. Yeah, I didn't rank Max because I wouldn't draft him. I just don't think he's going to play. But if he's right in that. So you got more power up here than I do.
I do.
Yeah.
Altuve,
so for me, I mean,
go ahead.
Go ahead. We can talk Altuve. He's my fifth. Not dissimilar from Simeon. He has that track record, but he swings at everything. His XOBP last year was 338, so a little bit better than Albies and Simeon, like we talked about. But the power is declining, the speed is declining, and the bat to ball for guys that swing a lot is the thing that ages the worst. So him being 31, I fear the start of a decline, but I couldn't take him out of that second tier yet because he's still, he still hit the top of that lineup and still will hit probably 20 plus home runs and steal 5 to 10 bases. So
he's an interesting one for me because he's, he's regained some of that power, and he's not really a steals threat anymore. He had he attempted 8 steals last year, and he only stole five bags. And that's a sharp decline from where he was when he was younger, but he did score 117 runs and hit 31 home runs. RBIs, you're not going to get as much from him. He had 83 last year, although he may take more of a run producer role with Correa, probably being gone from Houston. He's not the player that he was before, but he still doesn't strike out. His strikeout rate was 94th percentile, and he's a 10% walk rate. And so he's going to get on base, and he plays in a really good offense and will hit near some really, really good offensive players, and Alvarez and Tucker and Bregman is back. And I think he's, to be honest with you, if I'm depending on what the rest of I expect the rest of my team to look like, I do have Albies in the first tier because I believe he's a better fantasy player and a better fantasy bet, but I would consider Altuve over Albies if I had some steals or I thought I could have some steals at other positions.
Mm-hmm.
And then your number 5 was Marte?
No, Altuve was my 5.
Oh, he was.
So Marte was my 3rd.
Uh-huh.
Now I talked about Albies not being my kind of player. When I look at Marte, he's exactly the kind of player that I have a soft spot for. I mean,
Sure.
his xVP was 370, only struck out 60% of the time. His fly ball exit velocity was 95. He's one of the best barrelers at the position. His speed is really good, but he doesn't seem to want to run, probably because he's never healthy enough. But I'm looking at skills, and I'm not looking at injuries, unless someone who is hurt, like Muncy. But yeah, he's projected for an 840 OPS, which is premium at the position. So yeah, I love his profile. I don't like the Diamondbacks, but hey, even last year, look at Ryan Reynolds, he posted 90-90 with the Pirates. So being on a bad team doesn't necessarily limit your opportunities, in terms of the counting categories. So he's only 28, and I just love what he brings to the table. I love that he could lead the league in batting average and hit 25 home runs and get on base at such a clip. I really love his skill set.
He's my riser, and I only based that up based on kind of where he's being ranked and the fact that he was hurt last year. I agree with everything you said, and nothing that he did last year, nor anything he did in 2019 when he was potentially an MVP candidate, is fluky at all. When you look at his profile, his percentile rank, average exit velocity is 82, max exit was 97th, and hard hit was 86th. If you want to nitpick with his profile at all, his launch angle last year was 10.3 degrees. And so to your point, he is hitting fly balls really, really hard. But if he can shift his launch angle, closer to 15 degrees, he'd be, he'll hit 30, 35 home runs if he's healthy. He's just, I don't know. He does have tremendous speed. His sprint speed is a lot better than his steal show. Given the injury risk, I think that probably the days of him trying to steal bags is probably over. And I think that's smart. The only hesitation I would have, I know we're speaking redraft right now, but the only hesitation I would have is we don't know what position he'll play moving forward, and we don't know what position he'll play if and when he's traded. And I would bet on outfield over second base because it will keep him healthier and keep his bat in the lineup. Last year, he only played 20 games at second and 71 in the outfield, but he's probably, for me, he's the best pure hitter at the position. I think he's a phenomenal player.
Yeah, I mean, the way I have by my data, was going to have the most hits at the position, based on plate appearances and his skill. So you look at his skill and versus plate appearances, he would have the most hits.
And we're going to get to your beloved Jonathan India here.
Yeah, I knew I would have to come to bat for this, and that's fine. I mean, the first two tiers. After the first two tiers, there's no one else who's projected above an 800 OPS outside of Chris Taylor and Brandon Lowe, and they both have a lot of swing and miss. So what I like about India and why I have him as my 4th is, again, projected for an 828 OPS, 118 WRC plus, and a 368 OBP with only striking out 22% in this first row look at big league at the big league. So to me, someone who comes in at their first look, there's a chance to improve upon that. And he barrels the ball, 9.6 barrel rate, which is good for the position. So someone who barrels the ball, someone who takes walks, someone who hits in a good ballpark, and did such to me such great work for being a first year player. He just really impressed me, and I didn't see anything in the skills. Again, he was in the upper tier of the things that I value: strikeout rate, barrel rate, OBP. Those are things that to me are carrying skills and show me the reduce the volatility. So I was looking for reasons to punch holes in his rookie year, but I thought the skills that he showed supported where he is, and I'd be very excited to have him. He's going to hit the top of for however shallow the Reds lineup is, it's the top is very good. So I like that guys top of the order. It makes a big difference.
Mm-hmm. I think those are all valid points. You can tell where I'm going with this.
Yeah.
He's my faller. I see where he's rated and how excited, and by other dynasty folks and fantasy folks, and I hear the excitement on every podcast I listen to. I hear the excitement around Jonathan India, but I saw a couple of big warning signs for me. First of which is he does barrel the ball very well, and he's 61st percentile in baseball last year, but his exit velo was in the 21st percentile and his hard hit in the 36th percentile. So while he barrels the ball, he doesn't necessarily hit it hard all the time, and he may hit it hard enough in the right direction to get barrels, but I don't know that he's a home run hitter as much as he might be a gap hitter moving forward. And so I don't know that 21 homers is something that he's going to continue to repeat. What his profile says to me is he might have 45 doubles, but he might hit 10 to 15 home runs and not the 21 that he hit last year. But if he gets stronger and he is able to turn some of those home runs or those doubles into home runs, then he may lose a bit of the speed. And if he wasn't a double-digit steals guy, which I think he'll continue to be, I believe his sprint speed on Baseball Savant was in the 90s. But if he doesn't swipe double-digit bags, where's his value come from? He's not. I think if his steals were 6 last year instead of 12, we might have a different perspective on him. So for me, he's So the other point that I was going to make here is that he's never hit 20 home runs in a season in the minor leagues as well, and he's never hit more than 11 home runs in a season, including the minor leagues, and he's also never hit over 270 at any stop, major or minor league. So what I see is a good hitter who takes walks, obviously has a very good eye, and will steal some bags for you, but I don't see the helium that he's getting. I do understand that Bad X and Steamer and all ATC and all the rest have him projected to make another jump this year, and obviously they understand a lot of the predictors and variables better than I do. But for my eyes, I don't see him worth picking in the second tier, and he's in my next tier, and he's not high in my next tier either. I see a profile that's a high on base, double-digit home runs, double-digit steals, but nothing to write home about. He'll give you production, but there's not a lot of upside for me. What say you?
Yeah, I can appreciate that. We haven't talked a lot about process, but what I've worked up for myself this year is I'm using the Bat X and to determine rate skills or like skills. So basically, the reason I value that is because it does have that StatCast element.
Right.
It determines steals per plate appearance and home runs, and then I'm running that through the at bats for plate appearances and playing time through ATC because it looks at several different systems, so you're getting more data to try to get a more accurate playing time. So through that, through that custom projection, I see they're spitting out 25 home runs and 9 steals. So and again, the quality of contact that he made and the ballpark he plays in, it doesn't seem unattainable. But I certainly think, to your point, if he's not able to produce, 20 plus homers, he's going to be a detriment to your team in that, because that's the one things I was surprised at looking at the position was just how much power was available. And if
Yes.
you don't have a player who hits at least 20 to 22, you're probably putting yourself at a disadvantage.
Right.
And I don't necessarily, I don't know that we've looked at second base that way. So it was a big takeaway for me that you need someone who's going to bring some power.
Right.
So certainly if he takes a step back in that department, and like you said, some of those home runs become doubles and he becomes more of a, set the table guy and isn't hitting for more power. But again, based on the data I see, I don't necessarily see a step back. So
Right.
that's where we're different.
The one other thing was he was such a heralded prospect. I think he was the number 5 pick in the draft in, I believe, 16 maybe. But he is, they expected big things from him when he was potentially a third baseman. And it took him, I know that prospects can develop later, but he's 25. It
Yeah.
took him a long time to get to the bigs, and he was considered to be a bust. He was certainly a post-hype guy.
He was.
And again, it's not to say that they can't develop in that way, but I just kind of like what I said about Albies. I don't know that I completely trust him enough to warrant drafting him or paying the price for him where he's currently going because of the hype that he's gotten over the last couple of months.
Yeah,
so,
that makes it hard for redraft.
It does. So I have Muncy and Lowe in this tier with Altuve and Muncy. I assume Muncy would be close to this tier or in this tier for you if you thought he was going to be healthy. Is that right?
Yeah, he would be.
He's kind of that old school 3 true outcome kind of guy. 249, 368, 895 last year, 95 runs, 36 homers, 94 RBIs. The one hesitation I would have, assuming health, that I would still have is he put up 2 steals last year, and he's probably not gonna steal two bags this year. But everything else is 14%, walk rate, 19% chase rate, which is 99th percentile, best hard hit rate of any second baseman. He hits a lot of home runs and he takes a lot of walks in a really good offense.
Yeah.
I don't really know what else. And he provides some flexibility with second and first. I don't really know what else to say about Muncy other than he's a darn good hitter. He's a hitter from this era for sure.
It's very good. I like that.
And then my other player in this tier, other second baseman, is Brandon Lau. Similar to Muncy, 247, 340, 863, 97 runs, 39 homers, 99 RBIs, 7 steals. He was second amongst second basemen in barrel rate at 14%, 88th percentile in the league, hit 39 homers. He's got a ton of swing and miss, which certainly makes me nervous. But he hits the ball really, really hard when he hits it. His launch angle lowered slightly compared to the last 2 years, but he's still in optimal range. He's just and I trust Tampa Bay to produce players that can hit home runs. It's a smart organization. He's obviously made adjustments in his approach that have allowed him to hit a lot of home runs. So he's my guy at 5. The one thing, or the couple things that make me a little nervous about him is his zone contact and chase rates are suboptimal. And when you have suboptimal rates like those, and the difference between your average and on base is, close to 100 points, it indicates to me that you're potentially a guess hitter. And he's guessing for pitches and guessing when to swing. And when he doesn't get the pitch he was looking for, he swings and misses. But despite that, he still takes a lot of walks. So again, my profile, good eye, lots of power, some steals, hits the ball hard. For me, he's my number 4, and in that, and in smack in the middle of that tier 2.
What is his walk rate?
Brandon Lau's walk rate last year was, it'd be 1 second here, 11%. So
Okay.
11% walk
Yeah.
rate, 27% K rate, 14% barrel rate, 43% hard hit, max exit of 111, average exit velocity of 89, zone contact 78, chase rate of 34, and a BABIP of 280.
Yeah, I figured he must have walked at a pretty decent clip. It was his XMP was 343, so with that amount of strikeouts.
So
Yeah, he's
go
a
ahead.
challenging player. He's a challenging player for me. Go ahead.
He is. He's I trust him more than a lot of other players. I think it's part of it is organizational bias. If there's something to be fixed, I believe that Tampa will fix it.
Yeah.
And I do think that power was real last year. All right, tier 3.
Can I just say it pleases me that neither of us have said Whit Merrifield yet?
I agree. So
because I was right. I was like, I'm gonna have to go to bat for this, and
Nope.
I'm happy I don't.
Nope. So one other note: if Marte's healthy, I don't know that Marte is going to be healthy, and I don't know that he's going to stay at second. But if Marte is healthy, he's in my second tier for sure. For sure. And he may be my number. He'd probably be my number 3 second baseman. All right.
Great.
Tier 3.
So in India, we're close because that's where I got him.
Right. So tier 3, I have 6 second basemen in tier 3. I have Javier Baez, who I rated as a second baseman. Ketel Marte. Why do I always want to say Placido Polanco? Like every time I see Polanco, I want to say Placido Polanco. Jorge Polanco, Whit Merrifield, Jonathan India, and Jazz Chisholm. In that order.
Okay. So you got a couple guys in here. I have it short, so I don't have Jazz or Baez on my list.
Okay.
My third tier was 5 players. The aforementioned Placido Polanco. Oh man, where did my ranks go? I lost my numbers. I have to count. My number 6. So first one in the third tier, number 6 Polanco. Low 7, Chris Taylor 8, Jake Cronenworth 9, and then the aforementioned Whit Merrifield at 10.
Nice. So Baez, I think is worth a conversation because he's such a puzzling profile and such a puzzling player. Everything about his profile screams incredibly horrible approach, and yet he produces very similar numbers year to year, and his bat to ball rates are just incredible. He was at 13% barrel rate last year, 45% hard hit rate, 117 max exit velocity. We all know this watching him on TV, like when he hits the ball, he hits it so hard. But trying to get me to take a second baseman with the 5% walk rate and a 34% K rate is not happening.
Yeah.
Also 47% chase, which is nuts.
I mean, it's not 50%.
It's darn close though.
Yeah.
But he's still 265, 320, 820 with 90 runs and 30 homers and 90 RBIs and 15 steals. And like, you can't sneeze at that, you know?
Yeah. And with I think Lowe is not, doesn't chase at that epic level, but in our format specifically head to head, I do wonder about, when they go through weeks where they can't find it and they are striking out, at such a clip, how many games is that going to cost you? You know what I mean?
Right.
So I think about that consistency. Yes, the highs are great, and like you said, at the end of the season, he very well might post those numbers again, as he's continued to do year over year. What's the road there going to look like and head to head, you know?
He could also carry you to a couple weeks of wins too,
That's
right?
true.
Because I think with
That's true.
each one of those slumps
Goes both ways.
is going to be countered with streak.
Yeah.
But obviously, the two of us both like to try to find players who are consistent and we can count on, and then use our own skill to be able to stack those players on top of each other to produce the same result week after week. And a player like Baez doesn't allow you to do that.
Mm-hmm.
So I have after him. Oh, the other thing to add is there is the question as to whether Comerica Park is gonna detract from his numbers at all. Being a right-handed hitter, and Comerica is not the greatest thing in the world. And coincidentally, we saw Nick Castellanos go from Detroit to Chicago and produce like a superstar in Chicago after hitting double after double in Detroit. So there's nothing saying that won't happen to Javi Baez as well when he arrives in Detroit. He also is a player that to me can press at times when he's struggling, and given his contract and the fact that he's kind of the, you know, he and Torkelson are the faces of the franchise with Riley Green, there's going to be a lot of pressure on him to produce right away. My next is Ketel Marte, but again, that's because I'm nervous about his potential injury, and I don't believe he'll qualify at second next year. And then after he is Jorge Polanco for me. This was one of those players, and this happens to me every year, where I look at his statistics when I'm going to scout and I say, where the heck was I on this guy? I had no idea.
Yes.
I had no idea
Yes.
that he had 97 runs, 33 home runs, 98 RBIs, and 11 stolen bases. No idea.
Yep.
So amongst second
Yep.
basemen,
I'm so glad to hear you say that, because I feel the exact same way.
I kind of felt like an idiot. I'm like, really? How did I not know that? He ranked, so we're talking about second base ranks, and last year Polanco ranked fourth in home runs, fourth based on who I had at second base, fourth in home runs, fourth in RBIs, and seventh in runs. And he's just a lot better than I realized. The other thing the question that I asked in the blog is, would you rank Jorge Polanco higher on this list if he had scored 3 more runs and had 2 more RBIs? Because then he'd be 100 runs, 33 homers, 100 RBIs, and 11 steals. And I think that would get a lot more attention. So what did you find when you saw Polanco? And did you have him in this tier?
Yeah, well, I mean, what I did, he's actually the top player in this tier for me. And the reason was, and you spoke to this, it's just the balance of his profile. You know, from here on down, to me, there are holes in every one of the players to follow, whether it be power, whether it be hit tool, whether it be speed. You're having to decide now and trade off. Polanco was the last player that I felt before that happened, where you get someone who contributes across the board.
Right.
And he has the underlying skills, you know, sub 20% K rate, barrel rate 10.1%, which is second only to Brandon Lau. His walk rate isn't great, but again, with his low Ks and his bat to ball, he's still posting a decent MVP and helping you with hits. And yeah, I have a projected for 25 home runs and 9 steals, 85 runs, and 113 WRC plus. So, and his OPS projected was 789 was my projection. So almost an 800 OPS. So just a balanced profile across the board. Didn't have the swing and miss, had the volatility. And yeah, I was just surprised. I was like, man, why have I not been on this guy?
Right.
I'm not once about trying to acquire him, to add him. I don't even know who has him in our league. And I just felt like a dummy. Because he just seems like a really solid all-around player on a pretty good offensive team. And he can play second or short, both spots. So yeah, I liked what I found. Glad I found him. I'll be looking at him more closely.
The one thing that made me nervous about him was his barrel rate went up 3.8 was 3.8% higher than it had ever been in his career. So it was 10.1% last year. And that kind of jump, you hope that it's one that he can carry. I don't know what the cause would be, that you could actually tangible evidence that you could point to. But his previous high in home runs was 22 that he hit in 2019, and he had hit double-digit home runs in only one other year coming into last season. So, I would love to be able to count on 33 home runs next year. I just don't. There are things in his profile that say that might come down just a little bit. But if you're talking about value and we're talking about a redraft, do you pick? I don't know what their ADPs are. I should look it up. But would do you spend a higher pick on Jonathan India, who has a lot of buzz right now, or do you wait a number of rounds and pick Jorge Polanco? Because to me, their statistics are pretty darn similar last year.
I think I would wait and take Polanco.
I think that would be the prudent thing to do.
Yep.
So I actually have Merrifield.
You're just
Go ahead.
You're paying a tax on India right now. Go ahead.
Right. I have Merrifield next.
Okay.
And what I wrote in the blog is I said Whitley David Merrifield is no Vincent Edward Bo Jackson. The question is, what is 2022 Whit Merrifield? And I asked that because he's posing in a Royals uniform with the bat behind his neck in the same way that Bo did in that score, that horizontal score card in like a no shirt and football pads. But he's, again, another player whose profile is the one thing that it does, and I think we're on the same page with this, the one thing that having Merrifield does for me is that I'm forced to try to compensate for, I love the steals and I love the plate appearances, which gives you a lot of hits, but you're forced to compensate for his OPS and his lack of home runs and potentially lack of RBIs to pay for those 40 steals. And that for me is just, if you have him and then you can't find, you've got a hole in another spot in your lineup, you're sunk. You're absolutely sunk. And that plus regression from him in OPS was more than enough for me to drop him. And I'll stand by where I rank him now compared to others. I've seen him as high as number 3 and 4 in people's ranks.
Yeah,
I don't get it.
I don't either. Yeah, and again, I'm colored by the league that I play in, and and my preferences for players. But I echo everything you said. You're putting yourself at a detriment in OPS. You're putting yourself in a detriment in power. His barrel rate's 3.5%.
Yeah.
And yes, his batting average is good. But he doesn't walk. His OBP, even with his excellent contact rates, his OBP is only 306.
Right.
So to me, if you're only posting that OBP, you start to slide, you can risk your spot in the order. And because what else are you bringing to the table for the team? And from a fantasy standpoint, again, you're just a 3.5% barrel rate. I just can't rake someone that highly who that's their barrel. I mean, that's well below league average.
Yeah.
Well below league average.
Well, and a 29% hard hit.
Yeah.
It's nasty.
Yep. And yes, he steals. He's obviously, and I know that there's more to stealing than being fast. We know that there's nuance, there's reading the picture, there's jumps, all those things. So he clearly knows he's demonstrated that skill, but he's not terribly fast.
Right.
And he's 32. So he loses half a step, I would not pay it. I personally, and I know that in the fantasy realm, we're all crazy about steals. We, not you and I, but just the league mates and the kind of the echo sphere, the echo chamber that we engage in. It's like steals. But I wouldn't pay it. I would not pay it. It's too much.
I would almost prefer to invest early in speed, or early meaning in their careers in potential speed, and then build a team around double-digit steals than have a constant hole in my lineup with Merrifield. It's not, I'd rather go, say for instance, you have an opportunity to draft like an Xavier Edwards or somebody like that, or as you did Brujan, pick up Brujan a long time ago. Those sorts of moves are to me, so much more prudent to make than it is to, now Edwards doesn't hit for power either, but I wouldn't spend, what I'm saying is I wouldn't spend Whit Merrifield money on Xavier Edwards. So the last in my, so I have India next for the reasons that we talked about. And then I actually rated Chisholm as a second baseman.
Okay.
And I'll just touch on him real quickly. There's no riskier second baseman than Jazz Chisholm. And I feel like there's people who are either, over the moon and so excited for the next great speed power guy. And then there are people who just won't touch him with the 10-foot pole. And I'm one of those.
Yeah.
Unless I can get him on the cheap, which you can't anymore, given the helium in his stock as well. 18 homers, 23 steals. That's great. He was 23 years old. He's entering his age 24 season. You can project tremendous value. The only two 2020 players last year were Trey Turner and Ozzie Albies that were eligible at second base. And so it's, to me, I get why people are excited about him, but 7% walk rate, 29% K rate, 33% chase rate. Would anyone be surprised if he hit 200? I wouldn't. He could hit 200 with the 2020 season, or he could end up in AAA next year.
Yeah.
But I also wouldn't be surprised if he hit 290 and hit 30-30. That's just, to me, the risk is far outweighs the potential reward, and he's just not my. I feel like you're flipping a coin, right? Like you pick him and you're flipping a coin as to what the production that he'll give you next year. Not my guy. Let's just put it that way.
He's a wild card for sure.
He is. So did you have any other players in this tier?
Yeah, so my second tier, Polanco, Lowe, Taylor, Cronenworth, and Merrifield. So I think Taylor and Cronenworth are the ones we haven't talked about. Just going back real quick on Polanco, what you said about the increase in his barrel rate. I pulled up his profile here in Baseball HQ Forecaster just to look at it. His barrel rate is steadily increased. He went 3, 4, 7, and then 10 last year. I'm throwing out 2020. I'm looking at 2019. His expected home runs he actually underperformed. So he deserved better than he got with his home runs. Same thing with the first half last year. His home run to fly ball was 9, and expected was 14. And then only in the second half last year did it normalize, where his expected was 20 and he got 20. So it's interesting to see. It seems like there's continual incremental improvement, right? And there's nothing in terms of expected. There's quality of contact isn't saying that the increase in power that you saw was, lucky per se, based on the skill. So just kind of interesting.
Awesome.
I would share that.
Good stuff.
I like to see that when it's like steady improvement. It's not necessarily up and down or just like a big spike all of a sudden. To me, that's reassuring when I see a player who is over time just progressively gotten better.
It can be a learned skill with staying power as opposed to luck. There's more evidence that it's that, for sure.
So Len Lowe, I think we talked quite a bit. So to me, he's the first player I consider a trade-off where you're getting the power, and he's not a 0 at speed, but I do question how much he will continue to run. But Tampa is smart, and seemingly all their guys run when there's opportunity. It's situational, so he's not going to be a 0. But the power, you spoke well to his power, but you're giving up some hits. I have him as negative 9.5 points on hits, and the up and down. So, but his barrel rate was the best at position, and the power is the carrying tool. So that's kind of where I'd have Muncy in that same range if I listed him.
Sure.
And then Chris Taylor was my next second baseman. To me, to me, it's really about, are you going to regress them back to pre-2019 skills? Are you going to look at the skills he showed the last 2.5 years and put that in the role that he now has? I think the forecast, the different projections, some of them have him lower, some of them have higher, and it's really about how much are you going to weight his skills. If you look, to me, the skills that he's demonstrated the last 2 years, His barrel rate was third at the position last year, and that's been he's consistently posted that the last 2.5 years. And I think he's going to get 625 plate appearances playing just about every day for the Dodgers.
Where
So
can I ask? Where do you think he's going to play?
I think second, left, and center.
And who are the?
Yeah.
Can we walk through real quickly who's projected to play those positions in our minds?
Yeah, I think it's, obviously first is a big question mark. Presuming Muncy is healthy, obviously he's going to be able to play. He would be there, but I think it's Taylor at short, Turner short. Sorry, Taylor at second, Turner at short, also Turner at third, Justin Taylor. Justin Taylor, Justin Turner, forgive me. And then left field, Pollock, center field, Bellinger in right field, Betts. But they're gonna rotate Pollock. They're gonna rotate Bellinger. I don't think is gonna play against lefties, at least to start the year. And then I think Lux, fits in second. I mean, and then they rotate guys. Yeah, but certainly if you don't think he's gonna play, then he doesn't get this rank. Because to me, a lot of it is about playing time and then what he brings from a power and speed.
Sure.
What he brings in terms of power and speed, if you play that over the plate appearances, I believe he's going to get, it comes out to, 8 to 12 steals and 18 to 22 home runs with that barrel rate. So there's potential for more with a lot of runs in that lineup. So yeah, I don't know. Where do you see the playing time?
I guess I see. I think they're going to give Lux every opportunity to be the regular second baseman. We'll talk about him a little bit later. His pedigree, what they thought of him as a prospect coming up, the fact that they played him in center field in the playoffs in order to get his bat in the lineup. There are things about his profile that say to me he's gonna still be really good. He's a player that I would certainly target if I felt like the manager in our league was willing to trade him. Lux is in his team name, so I mean, he's not real eager to trade him, but I think Taylor gets 450 plate appearances, potentially more because of if Muncy is out and Justin Turner aging. I see a bounce back from Bellinger. I think at least, meeting his last year and his MVP year halfway. Betts as well. I think Pollock, so Taylor gets, to me, Taylor gets some time in left when Pollock needs a rest. Pollock is a little bit older. He'll spell Lux against tough left-handers. He'll spell Turner sometimes as Turner's getting up in age. He certainly will play for whoever's playing. If he'll play in left field or center field, if Bellinger plays first quite often, but I see him as a super utility as he always has been. But I think Gavin Lux is the big one. If Gavin Lux is the player that we think he is, or that I think he is, I think we're not going to see Taylor get the same kind of at-bats as he may have in the past. That's just me. And then
yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's a sound argument.
Even after, say he is healthy, or say Taylor does get 500 plus plate appearances, you're still talking about 20 home runs and 70 RBIs and just over double-digit steals and a lower average. And so for me, there are some players that in this range, there are some players that I would rather take a chance on with upside than pick Chris Taylor. For me, some of his value is in the versatility as well. And then the other one was Cronenworth, right?
Yeah.
So he's an interesting one.
He is, and he's someone I see as a detriment in power. His barrel rate was only 7%. So, I mean, you probably have his stats from 2021 pulled up. Looking forward, I have him projected for 18 home runs and 8 steals. The reason I have him here is just his zone contact is excellent. His place in that lineup seems pretty assured. So, and his expected OVP is 350. So, in terms of best ball, OBP, and he's not a 0 in those categories.
Right.
You know, we'll get you some home runs and we'll get you some steals, and should again contribute his very, very good in runs. And I love the contact ability. He's really in the upper echelon in terms of that. But I don't think he has the ceiling.
So he did score 94 runs and 21 homers, 71 RBIs, and 4 steals last year, but he needed 643 plate appearances to do it. Kind of like Albies, like if you can count on, and Merrifield for that matter, like when you can count on those kinds of plate appearances, then, you know, sure. But if you're looking at him as a 20 home run guy and annually, and last year he needed 643 plate appearances to do it, and he's the kind of guy that moves around the diamond potentially, and as players for them come up, he's, you know, I could see him getting fewer at bats. So say he got 500 at bats instead of 643, he might be a 16 home run hitter, right, with 60 RBIs and 3 steals. At that point, that's a replacement level middle infielder in our league.
Yep.
So I don't buy it. I've heard people incredibly high on him. I hear the contact ability. I see that it's 94% contact rate, and that's phenomenal. But it's a 7% barrel rate and a 35% hard hit. And he's just, I don't know, he's not my type of player. I think he plays a role. In a perfect world for me, Jake Cronenworth would be kind of the first or second guy off my bench who I could plug in if I have a bad platoon situation or if somebody gets hurt. But he's not a let me go pay for him second baseman, in my opinion. All right.
Very fair.
Anything else on Cronenworth?
I don't think so. I think just circling back to Chris Taylor real fast, and I mean, to be fully transparent, I roster Chris Taylor in our dynasty league, and I'm investing and struggling with, the idea of what role I want to have him play on my team. Do I want to keep him? So I'm in by no means not invested in this, but I think for me, I've watched a lot of Dodgers, and I think where we differ on this is I don't like what I've seen from Gavin Lux. I don't necessarily think that they're going to unseat him. I don't think Chris Taylor is going to lose playing time because of Gavin Lux. I think certainly he could lose playing time, but I don't think it's going to be because of Gavin Lux outplays him. And I don't think they would have gave him that contract if that was the case. But again, that's just me watching the team and his body language and his performance. I haven't seen anything that makes me think that he's going to come in and take his job.
Yeah.
But
it's
anyway,
I'd also say though, I think Taylor's contract is not, I don't see it as primarily a reflection of Lux as much as I see it as, Muncie's injury plus Bellinger's, crater of a year, and then Pollock getting up in age, and even Mookie Betts not having a Mookie Betts year. Chris Taylor to me is support and insurance for all of those guys. And to have the luxury of signing a player like a Chris Taylor without, a hard, fast, like position for him to play every day is a luxury, but it was a very smart move given the volatility of the players that I just mentioned. So Lux was actually in my bottom tier, and I'll go over real quickly what it is that I see. Last year he had 242, 328, 692, 49 runs, 7 homers, 46 RBIs, and 4 steals. I saw a patient hitter who had an 11% walk rate and a 26% chase rate. The walk rate was 73rd percentile and the chase rate was 87th. He also had above average rates in average and max exit velocity. So there's power and there's a really good eye that's present. He did have a 47% ground ball rate, which is not good. And his launch angle was 11.3 degrees. So, you want it in that 15, 20 degree range, and his wasn't. In contrast, Brandon Lowe has always been between 15 and 20. And I think that's part of why we see him hit so many home runs. But
I also think Lux is, he's 23 and he's in an organization that I trust with everything. I think that the Dodgers are such an incredible organization and have such they understand the current game so incredibly well. And so if you have someone who has, tremendous power, right? He's got really strong wrists and we see it when he does hit the ball. And a hitter that already has a young hitter that's able to take walks in the way that he does. To me, those are he's got a very fixable situation, not totally unlike Jorge Polanco, right? And so we see Polanco's launch angle increase, and then he hits 33 home runs. So if you take Lux and his power and his eye, and he was in the 94th percentile for sprint speed in 2021. And he's able to elevate the ball just slightly, just a little bit more than he did last year. To me, you're looking at somebody like close to Albies almost, right? That kind of talent is present. And again, it was really telling to me that the Dodgers, despite his struggles over the course of the year, the Dodgers wanted his bat in the lineup in October, and they were willing to put him in center field for the first time in his life and have him make a really important mistake at the wall, not catching a ball, because they believed in his bat in that situation. So to me, I get the argument against it. And I think the eyeball test is important, but he's a stock that I go the other way. I would actually invest in Gavin Lux if I could right now and buy low, because I see a lot of underlying things that where we could see a really, really productive player.
Very well.
I'm not going to blow that one up.
I'm not. I think I said my piece on it. Yeah. So my last tier, I have Urias, Enrique, Ty France, Gene the Hit Machine, Gleyber Torres, Jan, and then Tommy Edman. So in this tier, the first two guys to me posted intriguing barrel rates. I'm really hesitant. Enrique really had kind of a career year. He had right-handed pitching better than he ever has. But there's a lot of the underlying metrics support what he did from a power perspective. And the Red Sox, for whatever reason, seem to love him. They're right now, Rusty Resource has him as the leadoff hitter, which again, regardless of what I think about him, and his xWOB was 340. So he's only projected for 2 steals. He really doesn't run, so you're getting a 0 in that category. But if he's sitting atop that lineup, and even if he produces 80% of what he did last year from a power department, could be a nice player for the 12th second baseman. And he also has outfield eligibility. Rios is only 24, and him spiking that barrel rate really got my attention. He's dropped his carry down to 20%. I'm surprised the average isn't better, but again, going in his age 25 season, starting to show some signs maybe that he's going to bring that hit tool that he has as a prospect, and he's starting to barrel the ball. I think could be an intriguing pick later in the game here at second base. We talked about Ty France a little bit at first base. Just a really good quality hitter all around. It's going to be a 0 at speed, much like Urias and Enrique, but give me a guy who can post a 350 OBP, is going to hit for a high average in the middle of the lineup in this range, and I would gladly. I really like that profile. Gene Segura, again, is going to be an asset in batting average and hits. Is going to play. I think he's a little bit underrated. I'd expect his steals to fall off. As I was looking at his sprint speed, it's continued to decline year over year. So the steals may go away, but he's going to help you in batting average and hits, and is not a 0 in power. I don't necessarily want to talk about Gleyber Torres. I have him here because he's expected to post his 760 OPS and a 110 WRC plus. And at least for another year, unless he falls apart, he's going to play. So there's nothing in his profile that gets me excited. League average barrel rate league average velocity. And a lot of people are debating whether, what we saw in 2019 is a blip or if he's going to get back to that. I don't really care. But I think it's the 15th second baseman. He's going to pop a few. He's going to run a little, and he has a respectable bat to ball and will play. So I think he's a replacement level, kind of in that range. And then Edmund, I really struggle with. Not totally different than Whit Merrifield, because he's ranked so much higher because of the steals. But when I look at 719 OPS and a 4.3% barrel rate, I think, am I willing to pay, for that? I'm really not. So I think he's thought of a lot higher in most lists because of he's continued to post really good stolen base numbers. But I'm just not interested in a power list profile and a 719 OPS at this position. Maybe 5 years ago you can get away with that. So no more, as we talked about.
That's interesting. So comparing Edmund to Merrifield, last year Merrifield had 720 plate appearances and Edmund 691. Merrifield 97 runs, Edmund 91. Merrifield 10 homers, Edmund 11. The place that Merrifield outpaced him was RBIs 74 to 56 and steals 40 to 30. But this is wild to me. So these stats are all the same. WRC plus of 91, walk rate of 6%, K rate of 14%, barrel rate of 4%. They were the same for both Whit Merrifield and Tommy Edman. And then Edman was 35% hard hit versus Merrifield's 29, and a 113 max exit velocity versus 108, and average 88 versus 87. So I bring it up because A, they were eerily similar when I started to look. But B, the question is, why would you, if it's not our opinion about Merrifield, why would Merrifield and Edman be so far apart and you'd be willing to spend so much more draft capital for Whit Merrifield instead of Tommy Edman?
Yeah, I wouldn't. I view them pretty much the same.
Mm-hmm. It was crazy to me when I looked at that. There's no way I'm spending for a 30, Merrifield's 33 going into age 34 season, I think. Spend that much
32
over
going into 33.
A 27-year-old Tommy Edman. It's nuts. So did you
honestly, I really wanted to put Colton Wong as my last second baseman and leave Edman out, but I just felt like because he's my next one on the list and he's projected to have a better OPS,
right?
14 steals and 13 home runs.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think he was ever healthy last year.
Mm-mm.
And he played in that, St. Louis is a very tough park for hitters, and he never really got to really get his feet under him last year. He kept getting hurt. Right. So I'm really intrigued. He is 31, but I really like Colton Wong as a player. I love watching him play defense. He's really smart, really competitive. I really wanted to put him as my 16th instead of Edman, but because I think I would almost take him over if I was building a team and I was down in this range and I had to have a second baseman. I would prefer Colton Wong. So I think, well, why wouldn't I rank him that way? Right. This is where I struggle with this because I struggle with, like, is this my list or is this me trying to make subjectively the best 16 second baseman? You know what I mean?
Right.
I struggle with that. Of like, I think I go back and forth, like, no, this is my list. If I would take this player over this player, I should rank them higher.
Right.
And then I think like, no, this needs to be, look at the numbers, look at the data, take the names away. What is the value 1 to 16? I go back and forth. It's tough.
So Wong actually last year was with the Brewers, but his average exit was 33% and his hard hit was 21%, and surprisingly his sprint speed was 43%. But I also love Colton Wong. I debated Colton Wong or Brendan Rodgers, and Rodgers was one out. Rodgers, we can spend 2 seconds on him because he was traded in our league for some draft capital, but I don't know how far you've dug into Brendan Rodgers. but it's ugly.
Yeah, I don't like it.
It is not. He just hits the ball into the ground. Plays at Coors, and he's a 50.8% ground ball rate last year and a 6.3% launch angle or degree launch angle. Like that's in
Yeah.
Coors, it's like that's the absolute worst possible scenario. He's still my 16th because despite those numbers, he had 15 home runs and has the pedigree to be a great hitter, but I don't necessarily see it. And then the only other one I have on this list here is Eduardo Escobar. Escobar did you have him at second?
I do not.
So 253, 314, 786, 77 runs, 28 homers and 90 RBIs with 1 steal. So for me, again, it's like that same feeling that I got when I looked at Jorge Polanco, I got when I saw Eduardo Escobar's numbers. I was pretty surprised by the runs and homers and RBI. And then over the last 3 years, not counting the COVID year, he's averaged 82 runs, 28 homers, and 97 RBIs. So he's one of those players that, like, would he excite me to have him as my starting second baseman? Not at all. Not at all. And you would have to make up for his steals and potentially a little bit of a few hits, but he provides a ton of production. And I don't think that he's one to be overlooked. And then I have the same guys that you had talked about in my honorable mention: Ty France, Nick Madrigal. I think Madrigal is really, again, kind of like similar thought process to Merrifield and Edman. But with hits, the only way he's worth anything really is if he steals any bases. I have Kike in the honorable mention, Jeff McNeil, because he used to be a good hitter. There's talent there. Segura, Wong, and I also put Adam Frazier there. I know that he swings a toothpick for a bat and doesn't hit for any power, but his OBP is outstanding and he's a good hitter. But obviously not well-rounded. One other note, I pulled up Ty France on Savant, and I think of him differently because he's a stockier guy and he's playing first base now, but average exit velocity percentile was 35 and hard hit was 36, and walk rate was 26th percentile and sprint speed was 21. So it's a profile that I don't see like really any upside in, and I know that he was hurt a bit last year, but this is coming from a Mariners fan, but I don't see a lot of upside in his profile for me. I know he'll hit for some average and some homers and drive some guys in, but some of it I think is perception and reputation and not actual production. You got anything to add on the second base redraft?
I don't. Let's move on.
Do you want to maybe talk about any big shifts in how you would rank these guys with Dynasty, and then we can get into some of the players that we added to this list?
No, I'd rather just go through it.
Okay, that works. What is your list?
Do you want to do Dynasty prospects first or Dynasty first?
Oh, we can do Dynasty first.
Okay. I know that kind of spoils the prospect list.
Okay, let's do prospects. No, let's go. Let's do prospects.
Okay, so my 1 through 5 were are CJ Abrams, Vidal Brujan, Justin Foscue, Nick Gonzalez, and Nick York.
Say them for me again. Abrams,
Brujan, Foscue, Gonzalez, and York.
Interesting. And so do you have Gorman at third, or you just don't have Gorman in the top 5?
I did not have him pop up as a second baseman.
Got it. I do think, if I'm not mistaken, I do think we'll see him as the starting second baseman later on in the year in St. Louis. I think that's kind of his only route to playing. So I did have him there.
That makes perfect sense. I download the Fangraphs
Uh-huh.
as a place to start. And so if they don't have a player there, then I would miss that. I didn't necessarily think about that.
Got it. And
That
then
makes sense to me.
I'm interested in Bruhan and Fosky over Gonzalez.
I tend to favor guys that are closer, as you know.
Sure.
So Foscue was in AA last year, and Gonzalez was in high A.
Mm-hmm.
He's 23 versus 22. So I mean, age-wise, they're pretty similar. They have his similar raw power, with a little bit more speed for Gonzalez, but a little bit they have his hit tool rated is a little bit higher than Gonzalez. So I was basically looking at tools and proximity of how I would value these guys. I have more of a fondness and a first person knowledge of Gonzalez, but I was looking just at he's in high A, so he's a little bit farther away. So I was favoring the guy that had a little closer proximity and is rated slightly higher on the hit tool. They look fairly equal of their power projection.
I think they're similar players for me. I've watched some clips of Gonzalez, and I love his hit tool. I think I can see him as a future batting champion. And he gives enough, he hits for a decent amount of power. The steals are what I don't know are gonna translate. That makes me a little bit nervous because he's gonna have to hit a ton in order to carry his value if he doesn't steal bags. Bruhan is interesting because, we had this conversation over text earlier today that to me, he's more of I think Tampa will start to use him in that Ben Zobrist role a bit since he is capable of playing second in the outfield. And Brandon Lau's not really going to go anywhere. And the thing I like about Bruhan is that he's, is not a bad hit tool power speed guy. He's a good hit tool and a good eye. And I think the power is the thing that may not hit the ceiling, but he's going to be a great source of steals. And we all know that that's something that's incredibly valuable. So I have Abrams, Gonzalez, Bruhan, Gorman, York as my top five. So Gorman is, I think we'll see him by the All-Star break. I wouldn't be surprised to see him break camp with the Cardinals this year. And I think he has a tremendous, there's a tremendous spectrum for Gorman. I know he has a ton of power and if he can become a 30 home run guy at second base, that's going to be hugely valuable. But there's a lot of swing and miss for me. And that's a profile for me right now that I don't want to take a chance on. A little hesitant to rank York at 5. I know how much of a breakout year he had last year, and he's kind of the talk of the town in the same way that Jonathan India is as a major leaguer, but he's still so young. It's going to take him a long time. And I think that everybody, this is going to sound silly, but everybody wants the next second baseman in Boston to be Dustin Pedroia 2.0. And so I think I'm always cautious of New York and Boston prospects because there's the potential to create a lot of helium for those guys that may not be justified. But everything I've saw from York has been really incredible thus far. Who do you have in your 6 through 10?
Yeah, I would echo that about York. I mean, I picked him up because I had read a write-up last fall of the season he had, and he was a 60 grade on his hit tool.
Mm-hmm.
And he showed more power this year. So when they start to develop that power with that kind of carrying tool, I guess what gets me excited. But I would share that concern. This is really his first professional season at high A. So so my second 5, Michael Bush,
Mm-hmm.
Tupaquita Marcano,
Mm-hmm.
Cesar Prieto, Tyler Freeman, and Xavier Edwards. I had Xavier Edwards and Ezekiel Duran kind of tied for the last spot. Both very similar. They were rated with very strong. I'm sorry, that's not right. I'm going to confuse between Freeman and Edwards. Yeah, so Bush, Marcano, Prieto, Freeman, Edwards. or my second five.
Mhm. So I have Bush, Edwards, Bosque. I rated Osvaldo Cabrera as a second baseman. And then I added another one. I have Eddie's, Leonard, and Ezekiel Duran. I don't know that it's worth going too far into any of these guys. I think it's more about, at this point, it's more about what kind of profile do you prefer, and do you think that there's a place for this player to come up quickly, or to be able to become a full-time player in the major leagues. The only one on that list that's really interesting to me is well, Bush and Edwards are the two that are interesting to me. Bush is I don't know that he's going to get the opportunity in Los Angeles because he's blocked by Lux and really anybody else that can play second there. But I could see him getting traded or traded at the deadline for bullpen or something else that they need, and becoming a really good hitting offensive second baseman. And then Edwards is just an athlete that is going to steal a ton of bags. And he too doesn't have a route to the majors because he's blocked by both Wander Franco and Brandon Lau, but a talented player nevertheless. Anything to add on those prospects? Any thoughts?
Yeah, and looking, I was intrigued that Mercano, who was traded to the Pirates last year, they have him rated as a 70 grade bat control, but only a 30 on game power. So I knew that he was a versatile player. He came from the Padres system. I was surprised to see his tools rated that high. And so I'm really curious to see what he can do. He's pretty close to the majors, to see what he can do. Obviously long-term Nick Gonzalez is going to be at that spot, but yeah, he can move around. He's a pretty versatile guy. And the other player that was intrigued to was Cesar Prieto, was an international signing who won the batting title the last league he won in. Has a really fantastic hit tool, on base ability, but again lacking power. It has to make that transition, but is a pretty mature player. So I'm just interested to see. Obviously, there's opportunity in Baltimore. Hopefully, they're going to start to be more competitive. So here's another guy who kind of international prospect who is really interesting to me in that bottom five.
Love it.
Right. So I guess we can move to second base dynasty now. Now, as I said, I had Turner rated as a second baseman. So I've got my top five are Turner, Albies, Simeon, Lowe, and Abrams. How about you?
So my top five, very similar, except India, of course. I had Albies, India, Marte, Simeon, Abrams.
Let's see here. I have Lowe a lot higher than you, obviously. I guess I'm just a believer here. And
carrying that Tampa flag.
That's right. And you do see India in that top five. We don't have to beat a dead horse, but I find that interesting. Question: how much do you? So a player like Muncy or Baez or Altuve, or they're all different, obviously. But how do you weight where that player is in the arc of their career when you're creating these kinds of lists?
Yeah, I think it's evolving for me as we've had these discussions, and thinking about, what is the skill set they bring, and then where are they in that arc of their career, and how is that going to age, and then also what is their, try not to be overly penal of their age, if they are post peak, not being overly dramatic in the reduction. So I think I'm trying to just kind of find that balance for me where I feel comfortable. To me, obviously Simeon is the oldest player on this list. I moved him from second to fourth, so I'm dropping him down a little bit. but he's just consistently post 650 at bats, and I feel like he's going to continue to at least for 2 to 3 more years, maybe. So I felt comfortable having him in my top 5 for Dynasty.
It's interesting because as much as, I love prospects and studying them and how excited I get, I tend to have young players on my team. I always have to, when looking at a dynasty rank, I always have to remind myself that, half of these guys aren't going to make it, right? And
Yep.
and it's really difficult to to stay objective or to try to stay objective and to stay away from your desire to dream on a player. I think we can get so caught up in the dream of what that player could be that we're not thinking with what we've studied. We're thinking with what we're kind of almost fantasizing about, right? And so it's a really gray area that is it's fascinating to me because I hear it in all of us managers that talk, how excited we get. And when you're putting this list together, I'm looking at mine right now and I've got Abrams at 5. I've got Chisholm down here at, I think 11 or so, Gonzalez, Bruhan, Gorman, and then Merrifield. I've got York, I've got Bush, and the numbers say half those guys are never going to pan out. And so it's difficult. It's quite a challenge to put together a list like this. You really have to pick through and figure out, okay, who are the guys that I really believe are truly going to make it.
I agree.
Is there anyone for you that you left off this list that you think would be a surprise to others, or that's lower on this list that you thought would be a surprise to others?
I think the one I'm the lowest on that would be a surprise is Gavin Lux, and we've already talked about that. But I'm just painted by again, like how much I've seen him play and how unimpressive he's been. And I get what you're saying about the walk rate. I think definitely data supports that, but I just haven't seen anything that gets me excited. Like I've had that kernel of like hope that I just, to your point, like people just seem to be grasping, and I know you don't do this because you have data, but I see a lot of people, they're just hoping like he has to turn around, he has to turn around, he has to turn around. Right. And I don't know why we have more endurance for some players, because it seems like other players, if they don't fulfill early on, we just wash our hands and like, well, that didn't work out.
Right.
So yeah, he would be the one I would think. I mean, I have him 13th on my dynasty list. I would anticipate most dynasty lists he would be much higher.
And just, I've got him 10th. I also have Turner as a second baseman, but I have him 10th, just above Nick Gonzalez. And then some of the hard ones for me too were like I had Polanco just after, so he's at 18 for me. And given what we just said about the year that he had, it's hard to rank someone like a Nolan Gorman or Nick York above him, but this list was not an easy one for me, as you can tell.
Yeah, it's tough. Yeah, so my second 5, 6 to 10 was Low, and then Altuve. Low flipping, obviously that flipped from my other list, but Low being 4 years younger. And then still in his peak in terms of power, like what he brings is that power, and he's going to be continuing to bring that. Whereas again, I think Altuve, the bats a ball, especially for guys that are a little bit of free swingers, that's what tends to go as they approach their mid-30s. So had them flipped around, but still have Altuve at 7, Polanco at 8, and then Nick Gonzalez at 9, and then Foscue at 10. So those are the two last prospects, like non-major leaguers, that I have on my list. So I only ranked Abrams at 5, and then Gonzalez and Foscue at 9 and 10.
So no Bruhan for you?
I have him at 15.
Got it. Yeah, we're not supposed to say this because we're supposed to know what we're doing, but it just, to me, it feels like I'm dropping a ball in a roulette wheel right now, trying to figure out which of these guys is actually going to be good for his career.
Yeah, and I had him, I had Bruhan right behind Merrifield, but similar type production, right? At his peak, maybe, 100 runs, 40 steals, and one guy's done it for 6 years in a row, and one of them we think he can do it.
Right.
And he plays for one of the deepest, smartest organizations in the big league. So it's interesting too, because like the Bruhan owner in our league won't budge on him for anything. You could break the bank for Bruhan and he won't give him up. And so that profile is incredibly valuable. And I think that's something to take into consideration, but I don't know that it's that I see him going way too high right now. Do you have anything to add on the dynasty list? I don't think that I do. It's trying to just get more comfortable. And like you said, it's sometimes you don't want to feel like you're just being random. You're trying to figure out, really get comfortable, like what is my criteria and how can I be consistently applying it from position to position. But I think to me, it shifts too. Sometimes
sure.
as we shift from different positions, because there's different areas of value. The baseline or replacement level production changes
Right.
Based on the position. So, but also just trying to be consistent, really trying to find my solid approach to doing this. But hopefully it's getting progressively better. Yeah, this is an interesting position because I don't think it's as bad as first base in terms of positional changes, but I do think, we have a lot of shortstops or we have shortstops in the development of a lot of these organizations who are going to move to second,
Right.
whether that's because they're blocked by a big league, someone who's currently on their team at the shortstop level and in the majors, or they're just, they're not good enough as they move up the levels to stay at short, then get moved to second. So there's probably 3 or 4 really good players that are not even currently considered second baseman right now. But that's another thing to think about too, with second base. But it's an interesting position. It's not super deep, but I definitely think it's deeper, especially at the major league level. Guys I didn't have on the list. We already talked about our love for Colton Wong. Hampson, Toro, Rogers. We can talk about LeMahieu. He might win the batting title.
Right.
It's a deep position, and you certainly have trade-offs after that. Those top 7 or so, you start to have to make trade-offs of, are you giving up power? Are you giving up speed? Are you taking a batting average risk? But there are valuable pieces that you can add in that could complement what your build is. It's a really interesting position.
I appreciated your point earlier about kind of that 20 home run threshold at second now. I think that's a change in the game too. We didn't talk a lot about a lot of 20 home run second basemen when we were young. There was a lot of Harold Reynolds going on long time ago. But for now, it is interesting to kind of set those. It's nerve-wracking too in our league where everybody keeps 15 and it's a 16-team league, because you look at that list and you try to project who's going to be kept. And if you feel like 20 home runs and 10 steals is kind of that baseline to have a winning team at second base, you have to kind of gamble to try to find it at this point, because most of those guys are going to already be kept. That's exactly the exercise that I'm going through right now, because I do not have anybody at second. My long-term investment at second was Keston Hura a couple of years ago, and we all know how that has turned out thus far. I could see him coming back, but it's kind of too bad.
Yeah.
So
yes, indeed.
So we talked a little bit about keeper line and draft strategy. I think that 2010 threshold is a very smart one. My keeper line, given kind of even talent at the rest of my positions, is probably at, so I have Chisholm, but it's probably at like 10 or 11, including Turner. So Turner, Simeon, Albies, Altuve, Lowe, Muncy, Baez, Marte, Polanco, Merrifield, India, Chisholm, and then Escobar, Edman, Lux Rogers, I would not keep. And then the honorable mention guys that I mentioned earlier, France, Madrigal, Kike, McNeil, Segura, Wong, obviously not kept either. What say you?
Yeah, I think looking at my list, and again, it's so dependent on team construction and things like that, but a lot of these guys, you could play them somewhere else and keep them, but just second base only. I think the last player I would consider keeping would be a Merrifield at 10. And then after that, even though I don't like Merrifield's profile, he would be too valuable to me to release the pool. I would prefer to try to trade him to someone who valued his what he brings to the table and get something that I value better in return. But he would be too valuable to cut, I think. So that's where I would cut it off. So that means that the next year for me would be like Urias, Enrique, France, Segura, Torres, and me. That I would release them into the pool and try to, find a different solution.
We're pretty much in agreement, it looks like there.
Yeah.
You have any other thoughts on second base before we just kind of do our open forum segment?
I don't know.
Overall
I think I've touched it. I think I've touched on the takeaways I've had in terms of how it's shifted, what I'm looking for, and what my own personal struggles are with the position right now. So yeah.
I just found a lot more counting stats than I expected to see in digging deeper. That was a really telling for me to see that there were so many good hitters. I think it's a position that I used to prioritize much more because I felt like the top end was so shallow. And at this point in time, in a 12-team league, I'd be pretty happy waiting until 11 or 12 to pick my second baseman. I certainly wouldn't go out on a limb for an Albies or maybe Simeon, but certainly not for an Albies, even though he's a great player, just because there's so many, because the next 8 second basemen, are not as far away from Albies as the players at other positions that I might want in that draft spot. And go Nick Gonzalez. That's my other second.
I'm really excited for you that you got him. I really hope he develops, and I just hope Pittsburgh across the board can bring some of this talent to bear, and I hope he's a part of it. I really do. I like him a lot.
I'm psyched. I love having at least one or two, younger players that I can really root for. Like I'll watch Pirates games, it's important to me to have a 4:00 team on the West Coast where, that 4 p.m. start on the East Coast, that you have a player you're invested in and you're excited about. And there's nothing like, becoming a closet Pirates fan because you're watching Nick Gonzalez every day, watching him become a star. I feel the same way about MJ Melendez. I know this isn't a catcher pod, but I'm getting pretty excited about him. I went down the YouTube rabbit hole of watching his home runs a couple nights ago, and I'm pretty excited about him too.
Are you thinking about keeping him now?
I am actually. I've moved around a bunch of keepers. I guess this can be one of the questions is, I was looking at some of the keepers I was considering for my 15th spot were Christian Hernandez, the shortstop prospect for the Cubs, Hunter Green, starting prospect for the Reds, and Luis Patino. Melendez was kind of more closer to 13th, 14th keeper for me, so he's already on the list. But for me previously, the keeping Christian Hernandez was a no-brainer because you could be giving up the next A-Rod, and I think we'll see him shoot up prospect lists, and he'll carry a tremendous amount of trade value, I'm guessing, by the end of next year. But I'm trying to win now. And really what it came down to, at least at this moment, is if I'm trying to win now, why am I keeping two prospects, he and Elijah Green, that you're not going to see until at least 2025?
Mm-hmm.
So I kind of got rid of him on the list, and it came down now to Patino and Hunter Green. And as great as, Patino's slider is, I don't know that he's going to pitch a lot of innings, and I don't know that he's ever going to put up the kind of numbers that would justify keeping him as a pitcher. It'd almost be easier if he was a closer or a dominant reliever to keep him at this point. But I love him. I love him as a pitcher aesthetically. Like, I love the movement on his slider is incredible. Like, he's just a really fun pitcher to watch. But in this moment, I'll keep Hunter Green. I think the upside is too much. I know he's an injury risk. I know that he can get a little bit wild, in that he only has 2 pitches, but and his fastball, even though he can get it up to 104 miles an hour, is really straight. But he's got the potential to be awesome. He's got the potential to be a number 1 starter, and he's a great athlete. And so for me, that's a chance I'd rather take if I'm going to take a risk. And he's got he's in pole position to be the 5th starter for Cincinnati as well.
Really?
Cubs are having a down, going to probably have a down season. The Pirates aren't any good. Milwaukee can pitch, but they're not the greatest hitting team. And, St. Louis isn't quite the juggernaut that it used to be. So he'd be pitching in a division that's not incredible either. So as of now, that's where I'm at. They'll probably change.
Well, I appreciate the complete breakdown. I didn't expect that. I was just curious of how you were feeling about MJ, given what you said.
It's probably misguided, but 41 home runs in the minor leagues, and a good batting eye, and, son of a coach, and potential to play third and first base is worth it to me. At minimum, he'll be a fun follow.
Yeah, I'm really curious to see how they dole out playing time and how much they allow, who gets the opportunities, and when they come up, and have a lot of potential in that pipeline there.
Do you have any thoughts on the Hall of Fame voting and the conversations that happened over this last week?
I know that David Ortiz got in.
Mm-hmm.
And I assume the other hub was about the performance enhancing players not getting in.
Correct.
Is correct?
It is. It's essentially Ortiz, who officially tested positive, gets in, and Bonds and Clemens and some of the others obviously did not. And it just, I believe Bonds is it's just, I don't know. It's hard for me to look at the Hall of Fame as a legitimate, institution. I'm not a Pete Rose fan. I never wanted Pete Rose to be in the Hall of Fame, but to have the hits leader and the home run leader and Roger Clemens, who's arguably, top 10 starting pitcher of all time, not in the Hall of Fame makes like absolutely no sense to me. And prior to letting players that tested positive for PEDs in, like, I guess you could legitimately make the argument that Bonds shouldn't be in. But once you let Ortiz and those kinds of guys in, it's a matter of like, were you friendly to the media? Were you friendly to the fans? And did people like you?
Mm-hmm.
And that's not what the Hall of Fame should be about. So I'm not a big Hall of Fame guy. I don't get, too riled up about it, but this year was pretty bad.
Yeah, I can't speak to the reaction. I can just say that I share your disappointment that Bonds is not in.
Mm-hmm.
To me, he has to be in. If given, again, if it's the Baseball Hall of Fame, he like, watching his transformation even before, he did whatever he did to go from a 40 home run hitter to a 70 home run hitter.
Mm-hmm.
Like, he changed so much from early in his career. to late in his career.
When
I
he
mean,
was-
he almost had like he almost had two Hall of Fame careers.
I was just going to say,
And-
he was a Hall of Famer
and-
essentially, like prior to going up 6 head sizes. And
Yeah. So
it's sad. To me, it's sad.
So again, yeah, it is. I would echo that, and that's how I feel about it. And I can't speak to the specific fervor this week. I had my head down, like studying pictures and
Yeah.
building, continuing to build out my projection tool I'm working on.
Mhm.
So I didn't really have my head in the news. I kind of pop on once in a while to see, like, is there a CBA update?
Mhm.
Just kind of like trying to keep that kernel of hope alive. But beyond that, I'm really, again, head down in data and studying, and not in the news. So I just think it's sad that Bonds isn't in. Unfortunately, what you said about the media probably has more to do with it than we would like to think, which
Right.
is terrible.
Right.
Just terrible.
And on that note, do you have an open forum question this week?
Yeah, my question was going to be just your favorite. I'm stealing for you because you always go with their favorites. Your favorite, either like podcast or annual publication, or just something content wise. Obviously, we're going from big time content consumers to creating a little content ourselves. But I'm just curious, like your favorite. Could be, again, your favorite annual publication or your
Right.
favorite pod that you look forward to each week. I'm just curious what yours would be.
So I like the tool shed from Fantrax a lot. I find them pretty informative and it's interesting because with podcasts, I was just having this conversation with family this week. So they play different roles for different people. And I know this isn't the question that you asked exactly, but for me, I've spent a tremendous amount of time, alone the last couple of years, and they've become more a part of my social day, in that, if I'm doing something in solitude, it's a way to essentially have a conversation. And I've come to really appreciate it. And so with baseball podcasts, because they're so mathematics and stats heavy, I can't listen to most baseball podcasts while doing something else, because it requires a lot more concentration to absorb the content. But what I have found is, and this is what I was discussing with family, is I can listen to a basketball podcast while working on baseball data or creating, baseball database, because basketball is less statistics heavy, and there's a lot more social and cultural that's discussed in a lot of those podcasts. So as an example, I'll listen to the Ringers basketball podcast with Chris Vernon and O'Connor, and it's really entertaining and really fun. And I feel like I've gotten to know those guys through this podcast, and they cite some numbers, but not a ton, and certainly not enough for me to have to stop and concentrate. And so I really, I listen to specific podcasts while I'm working with databases, and I'm listening to other podcasts when I really want to get into it. And so, if I'm watching a ball game on TV, I will listen to a baseball podcast, because I'm not focusing too much on what's going on the television. So I know that's a really long-winded, tangential way to answer the question, but for me, currently, Toolshed from Fantrax I love, Dugout Study Hall on the Pitchers List podcast network I love. I know you're a Rate and Barrels guy. I'll let you speak to that. I listen to First Draft podcast with Mel Kiper and Todd McShay. Hollinger and Duncan is another one, a basketball podcast. The Athletic Baseball Show I really like a lot. Those are some of the ones I listen to. Oh, and then big shout out Baseball and Things, Jason Churchill's Mariners podcast I absolutely love.
and that's a subscription. It's a Patreon thing, but he does a really fabulous job with his pod.
What's I know the athletic baseball show, they have sort of a different, not host, but different content each day. Do you have a favorite one of that?
Not really. I think
No.
they consistently do a really good job.
Yeah.
And I just appreciate the Athletic as an organization. Game Theory with Sam Vecini is a basketball podcast that takes more of a baseball approach, and they talk a lot about prospects, and that's actually a really, really good one. Then one other shout out, I've been, and I know everyone says that they are, I legitimately have been a Bill Simmons follower since day one, and he's still the gold standard for me because he incorporates a tremendous amount of humor and culture. I don't know that he's as well versed as he once was, but he's incredibly entertaining. And then one other one, just because it's baseball podcasts, Effectively Wild is obviously kind of the gold standard as well. I think they do a really, really fantastic job. Publications wise, I have an enormous stack of volumes of baseball prospectus at home. That's always been really fun for me to peel through. I don't know that any of the number of baseball forecasts and prospect books that come out that I prefer one over the other. I've just kind of grown up with BP, and so BP is my go.
Okay. The BP annual.
BP annual, and then I'm a BP subscriber online. I take it with a grain of salt. I don't know that they do as great of a job as they once did, and I don't love their statistical models as much either. But they're I've always been a BP guy. How about you?
Cool. Yeah, you mentioned a lot of the podcasts. Like the Pitcher List feed is a challenge for me because there's so many different shows that show up under that feed. I use Spotify, and so I go to Pitcher List, and I've seen Dugout Study Hall, but when you said it, I was trying to remember, have I listened to that one?
Right.
Because they have so many different ones, and I got turned off for them of them for a while because Alex and Paul would get on there together, and it would just be like a yuck fest. They would just be laughing the whole time,
right?
Which I enjoy. I enjoy that they enjoy each other, but it was like a little more content, please.
Sure.
So my favorite pod is, as you mentioned, is Rates and Barrels. And it's, I think, just because I've learned so much about how to read a Savant page, and the work that Saris does to sort of like try to help people understand the data. And they do a fair amount of narrative discussing of just like players and things, but they really try to look at the player subjectively, and they have a fun rapport. It's not the best entertaining show, but just from a content perspective, they do talk about pitching quite a bit, which I really love. And I will hear things on there that are counterintuitive, not counterintuitive, but counter, like trend wise, of like, hey, everyone's leaning this way, and they're not afraid to say, hey, well, I might sell on that because this is what I see when I look at the skills. So I just, I don't think you have to be all data or all this. I really like the way they analyze players and how they talk about the tools. I just learned a lot and really appreciate what they do. A close second for me is Sleeper and the Bust.
With Sporer.
I really like Spore. I do not like Justin Mason. I don't like the players he likes. I don't like the way he plays.
Right.
He like his whole punt batting average, and so. But I like that Paul will put him in his place and tell him that he's wrong. I get enjoyment out of that because that's what I want to do when I'm listening to Justin talk. I want to tell him to shut up, and Paul tells him to shut up. So it brings me a lot of satisfaction, and I love listening to Paul. He does solo pods sometimes, and he just cracks me up. I don't know why I find him so entertaining, but I also find that like the way he analyzes players is very in line with how I look at players.
For sure.
And so I tend to trust him because of that, because I know that we value similar things.
Right.
But I would echo what you said about the role of podcasts in my day to day. Like there is a social element, as crazy as that sounds, like having people in the room
Right.
with you. And there are sometimes like I will have to go back and re-listen, because like you, especially with baseball, I'll realize I've just been listening to this and enjoying this,
Right.
and they were talking about a player, but I wasn't really listening. I need to go back again and re-listen when I'm in front of the computer and I can pull it up and look at it as they're talking, because I've just been listening to it just for like that feeling of like my friends are in the room talking about baseball.
Right. Exactly.
And I haven't been paying attention to the content, and there's some real substance to it. But it's a big part of the way I stay connected and the way I study baseball. Podcasts are just a big part of it.
Right.
So
me as well, and especially since March of 2020, I think there's much more need for social and emotional connection. And given the fact that we're all kind of inside and pods of I don't feel silly saying this, they really provided companionship for a lot of us in those times. And I think podcasts have established themselves as an incredibly important part for social and emotional kind of health and enjoyment for a lot of us. A couple more podcast anecdotes. One I failed to mention that I really should is Chin Music with Kevin Goldstein. I just love Goldstein in general, and one in particular, he had a conversation with Jeff Passan from ESPN, and they went on for like 2 hours about the lockout for the most part. But the two of them were so brutally honest, and Passan is a guy who pushes the envelope a bit on ESPN, but he just let loose, and it was really really enjoyable. If you have an opportunity to listen to that, I would say like make that at the top of your list, because it was informative and fun and interesting, and you got to see a personality like Passan that you don't get to see in that form all the time. And then it's funny, one of the motives for wanting to do a podcast, I dabbled in it before, and I always wanted to, and you and I and Matt specifically have these long text threads about fantasy baseball, and have become friends in that way. And I was listening to, there was a moment, about, I don't know, 6 months ago or so, where I basically listened to an episode or two of any podcast that I could find that had the word baseball in the title, and started listening. And there was so much misinformation, and really, I say old school in a bad way or a negative way when I say it this way, and I don't think of old school as negative, but there was so much kind of citing of statistics that we have been proven to be either obsolete or random as indicators of what a player's performance is going to be next year. And I was, it was, all fans have a place, but I just thought to myself, as much as we talk about baseball and as much as we enjoy it and study it, let's record our conversations, because they're I think a lot more valuable than we had ever been willing to admit. So no, it's been and as an aside, this has been a really so far really, really fun and enjoyable and exciting thing for me to look forward to on Sunday nights, is to record this with you. It's pretty darn cool.
The same.
Awesome.
Do you have a question?
So my question was kind of would go back to the second baseman, and I did ask about the Hall of Fame and the whatnot. I don't want to talk about second baseman anymore. I think I'm more nervous about our draft and what I'm going to do about second base than I was even coming into this conversation.
Okay.
But no, not really. I think that in this moment,
it's a good time to wrap up because at least for me,
Okay.
I'm feeling appreciative and thankful for this project and really, really hopeful that baseball comes back soon.
Oh, heck yeah to that, man. All the positivity for that.
Right on,
Well
brother.
said.
Right on. We'll
All
talk
right.
to you next week.
Good night. Okay. Thanks.